Hello and welcome back to my LEGO Castle Kingdom. Today I'm excited to share many new exciting changes to this corner of the layout, which include the addition of a forest section, multiple new shops and businesses, as well as a few smaller updates and improvements to the harbour section all the way at the back. So let's take a look at each of these new updates in order, and we'll start with an overview of the forest. No good medieval kingdom is complete without a forest, and I thought the best way to include one in this limited space is to instead build a smaller slice of the overall forest that would border on the edge of the city. And even in this small plot of land, I think I've managed to recreate the feel of a natural green forest with many different trees and types of terrain, and you can imagine how this would extend outwards further on from where I've built into the rest of the forest. But as for what I have built, we can begin by starting with a look at the beginning of the forest, which actually borders on the farm, and as a result I've included a small apple tree, maybe as part of the farm's orchard, and you can see that features all kinds of different LEGO apples in different colours to represent the varying amounts of ripeness of each of the fruits. And you can even see some of the leaves which have fallen down underneath the tree below that. I thought it'd be cool to separate this apple tree from the rest of the forest and also break up all of this green with a nice cool stream which gradually converges into a small pond just behind the church, and that's a really nice natural barrier between these two zones, so I think it works out pretty nicely. So you can see this stream is a very cool colour of water, and that actually comes out of this small outcrop of rocks, complete with these transparent crystal pieces to give the impression of a small flowing waterfall. And the idea is that this stream would enter this rock structure from somewhere here, where it gradually comes gushing out until it reaches the end there, which includes the pond with a little duck around with some stones. And then there's also some of the other trees. So since my entire layout is based on a more northern and colder climate, I've included suitably appropriate trees, including a selection of spruce trees made out of leaf pieces. And do let me know if you'd like to see a tutorial on how I made these LEGO trees, because they are pretty cool designs. But basically they are just a collection of leaves arranged in different patterns, all connected at different levels to create the illusion that it's all part of a single tree. The next segment of the forest can be accessed further along towards this side, and as you can see, this is a small hill which this massive spruce tree sits on. That includes a little rabbit on the top there, as well as this burrow underneath, and you might even be able to see the trunk of the spruce tree extend down into that burrow just behind that spiderweb there. And the idea is that maybe some kind of creature has dug out that spot and gradually eroded the ground which this tree sits on in a sort of cutaway view of this area. And then over on the end of the forest we have a small swamp complete with a weeping willow that is made out of some upside down LEGO seaweed pieces, some whips in green, as well as some of this rope, the one with the segments on it, and a few leaf pieces to finish that off. I think that provides a perfect, very realistic design for a weeping willow. Maybe I can add a few more of these types of ropes and things later on, but for now I'm very happy with how that overlooks this swamp area, which as you can see also looks very realistic with the lily pads on top of this very eerie and murky looking surface of the swamp. Then that is bordered with some various shades of sand green, some toadstools and various shrubs and plants, types that you would find in a swamp like this. This looks especially cool from this side, especially with the edge of the swamp just trailing over the edge like that. And from here you can also get a better view of some of the other wildlife and plant growth in the forest, such as that tree stump there, some rocks in the background, as well as an owl perched on the tree. And here's what that looks like from a bit further away. And you can also see the start of this very dark wooden border, which actually separates the main forest from the rest of the city. And this brings us nicely around to the other side of the city, where the harbour is located, along with a selection of smaller upgrades, including this very unusual looking medieval crane. Believe it or not, this is actually based on a real life design for a type of crane in the Middle Ages, used not just in harbours and ports, but also in the construction of things like castles. And the idea here is the winch on the crane is actually operated by a person running around in a wheel on the other side, a bit like a hamster wheel, which winds and unwinds the rope which lifts the cargo. And this is actually quite a clever design if you think about it, back when they didn't have electricity or anything. And you can see how I've represented that in my Lego version with a minifigure who's actually held in place. He's just posed to look like he's running. I think that's a really neat combination, and I'm very happy with how this mechanism turned out. There's not quite enough space to motorise this, but I still think it works pretty cool as a manual play feature. And this crane will definitely become very important once we start to see some bigger sailing ships arrive in this port. So that's very useful to have in this area. But until then, there's just a few other bits of cargo waiting to be loaded, including this pallet of wooden planks, which is a very cool design made out of a studs not on top technique with a couple of Technic bricks to hold all three of these printed 1x6 tiles in place. And I think that looks really nicely there. Then there's also this little pig in a cage, which looks a little bit cramped for him, but he should be okay until he gets loaded onto the ship, that is. And then there's some more traditional food style cargo, including some fish, cabbages, and some wheat bundled up in those crates over at the back there. And with the addition of these new buildings, you can get some really awesome views looking down the various alleys and side streets, like the one behind these sailors here, which is very cool and creates that impression of a very dense, busy city area. And what creates that alley is the addition of this building here, and that is also very fitting for a harbour, because this is a pub, as advertised by the very fancy golden sign outside the entrance. This is a very unique construction compared to really most of the buildings in my medieval city, because this actually features quite a large roof that slopes down, with only really an opening for this nice balcony area, which sits above the large tavern window. And since this is a place that serves lots of beers and ales, I thought it'd also be a good idea to include some extra facilities around the back, in the form of an outhouse, where the minifigures can go if they've drunk a bit too much. This medieval toilet is equipped with a very shabby looking wooden door, as well as a simple seat inside. I'd also like to point out this neat roof technique, which is just constructed out of a bunch of these 1x1 plates with the teeth on the end, and they're just stacked alternating between a regular position and half a stud offset to create that layered roof tile effect, which goes really nicely with that. And I might even do something like that with this green roof here. It's just I didn't have those pieces in dark green, so that's something which I might need to order, but that will probably look much better for the roof of the pub as well. So like I said, that's the pub. Then this little building here is a small apartment building, which looks very cool in my opinion. Then we have this sand red coloured building, guarded by some kind of knight. So we'll have to wait and see what is so valuable inside this building. As well as this sand blue building, which actually combines together with the red and olive green buildings to form another small courtyard around the front. And this area looks really awesome from a minifigure's perspective. You really get the feeling that you're actually in the centre of a giant medieval city, with things like the roof lines connecting together, and that small courtyard area which forms a cul-de-sac at the end of this main road. So with all of the forest temporarily out of the way, we can get a much better look at these two new additions, which, as you might have guessed from this cauldron hanging on a sign outside, this is home to the Alchemist, who's currently inside his store mixing up some potions and concoctions of herbs. So we'll take a look at the interior very soon. But first I want to start with a quick look at the outside of this very short and narrow building. Starting with the base, which is actually made out of a combination of 1x2 ball joint plates stacked on top of each other. I discovered this technique when playing around with some of these ball joint hinge pieces, and you can see that when you remove the other half and combine it with another ball joint plate, the more you add together, that gradually forms a very neat rounded stone wall, which looks so fantastic and stands out from all of the other rock and stonework techniques which I've used for the other buildings. So I think that unusual stonework technique nicely complements the traditional wooden frame and timber design of the walls of the house, with those embedded windows which go in by quite a lot actually. And that design for actual woodwork continues around the other side. And below that, I've also designed a fully brick-built door, designed to look like it's made out of some heavy, reinforced, sturdy metal, to add an extra layer of security to the Alchemist's business. And then as we move up onto the roof of the Alchemist's building, this is actually made out of a selection of these rounded quarter tiles, similar to the technique used in the Lego Modular Buildings bookshop, and that continues on both sides until you reach the back area, which features this cool observation tower, which I think works really nicely to just add some differentiation in the height in this cluster of buildings. And as an extra little detail, I've added a tiny golden telescope sticking out of the top, overlooking the sea, so maybe the Alchemist does some stargazing in his spare time. So now let's have a quick look at this building, which is made out of a very rare sand red colour. It's so rare I even need to order some more pieces to finish up the panels on these walls. But I thought that this very fancy colour would be appropriate for what's inside this shop, and that's because this is a jewellery store. So you can see this also includes a very sturdy looking stone brickwork effect around the bottom, and that continues to that guard we saw earlier. And then for the roof of this building, I thought I'd design yet another variation, this time a curved style, which actually curves around pretty well at the top, a bit like the shape of a barn roof. And the way I achieved this effect is by clipping each of the beams that make up the roof to a bendable Lego hose piece, which I've hidden inside the roof, and that allowed me to bend it into shape to create that nice, subtle, even curve. So now we've seen enough of the outside, now let's remove each of the roofs to the buildings and take a look at the interiors. To begin with, we'll start with the ground floor, which, as you can see, has been fully opened up with the removal of all of those roofs. And we'll actually take a look at each of the shops in order. So let's start all the way over here, and this is the Alchemist's building. So there is the Alchemist himself, using a mortar and a pestle, following some ancient instructions to mix up some kind of herbal mixture. He's got a little fireplace over in the back there, just a corner one, and that actually feeds into the main fireplace network that is used for all three of these buildings. And then over on the other side of his store, he's also furnished with some more ingredients and equipment for mixing up his potions, as well as a ladder to get to the second floor. And that comes out on top of this little balcony area, which is complete with a writing desk and a small bed just in the corner. And there's plenty of light shining through those windows on all of the open sides of his building. Now let's head on down back to the ground floor of the jewellery store. And you can see that's the entrance to get inside here. So as we walk past the guard, we enter this small lobby area, which includes a very cool patterned design on the floor. And that floor design is simply made out of alternating colours of 1x1 slopes or cheese wedge pieces. There's also a small candelabra in the corner, providing a bit of light in addition to the windows, as well as some of the products for sale, which include a very expensive glass case with a flower inside it, because don't forget this would be the Middle Ages, and something like that would cost quite a bit, as well as some wearable jewellery in the form of a necklace. There's a shopkeeper, and some intricate decorational and ornamental helmets and armour. So a neat little selection, and you can see why with all of this gold and silver there, the shopkeeper has employed a guard to protect his inventory. And here's a better look at that alley as well, with things like the lantern, some plants, and a continued broken up stone path effect. And there's also a neat little curved wooden section to the back of the pub, as well as the steps which go up to this small apartment building which bridges the gap in between these three buildings. So now let's move around to the first floor of the pub. And this tavern can be entered through that door there, and straight away you'll see the barkeeper standing behind his little table, complete with all kinds of glass bottles of beers and ales, as well as the very dark and poorly lit tables, which adds to the atmosphere of this place. Looks like there's a few dodgy deals going on as well over at this table, where this suspicious person appears to be paying off some kind of mercenary. But that's just the kind of business that these places tend to attract in the medieval times. So now let's move up onto the second floor, not of the pub, but of the apartment that sits in the middle. And this is much brighter and more cheerful, because it looks like the inhabitants here, while they're not currently in, they're doing some washing, hanging up some clothes to dry, and they've got some brushes and various medieval detergents, or their equivalent that they used, probably some kind of herbs. And then there's some small washing hanging out to dry out the back, represented by these printed pieces. And that right there is the door to get in case you're wondering. You see that hinges open, and that's got just a tiny bit of space where that can be accessed from the stairs which you saw down below. And you might have noticed that there's not actually a way to access the second floor of the pub through a staircase, and that's because I've converted it into an extension for this small apartment in the middle. So you can see that's actually got a door which acts as a separation between the two rooms in this apartment. So this half features a very cosy looking bed, along with some trinkets on a shelf and some notes stuck on the walls, as well as a flower on a table. And then there you have that window which overlooks the harbour, and that will provide a really cool view once I've finished up with that area and added the ship which I'm going to build. And obviously I'm also planning on tiling that area over, because this is still a work in progress. So all in all, a fairly cosy apartment with a pretty good view of the port. And with that, that's pretty much it for this latest update to my LEGO Castle Kingdom. I've definitely not got that much more remaining space, but if you do have any suggestions for what you'd like me to include in the rest of my layout, especially with things like the castle, then please let me know your ideas in the comment section below. I do try to read them all, and I love hearing your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. A big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, and I'd really appreciate your support on Patreon as well. In return, you'll get access to lots of exciting bonus videos and behind the scenes content, as well as get to see your name here in the credits of my videos. So I'd really appreciate your support, and the link to my Patreon will be in the description below. I'll see you guys next time with even more LEGO creations, and thanks for watching.